player, I think it's very important that it's Brad Nelson.
Well, let's see right now. It is Brad Nelson indeed.
That
He's
is
going
a really
first.
big deal.
That is a big deal. I mean, he even said, like, it's super important for this deck to go first because it wants to get in early. It wants to negate or, counter every single thing that Kavartech could possibly do and then just run away with the game with this Hydroid Crisis go.
And the reason that you're going to see here why this is a big deal. Now, Edgewell Innkeeper is going to be able to slide through the counter spells, of course, but Rotting Regisaur will not be able to. Sinister Sabotage, pardon me, lines up perfectly against that card. And that's a huge top deck for Nelson as well. I think that Island's going to go to the bottom on the Scribe, but that's the second source of green mana and the fourth source of mana for those 2 copies of Frilled Mystic. So as Paradise Druid comes down here, Brad now has his counter spells up for turns 3, 4, and 5.
Oh, man, that is just so rude. Kavartech does have Order of Midnight to bring something back from the graveyard if it doesn't get countered, but yeah, Brad Nelson is just going to be firmly in control with Sinister Sabotage and Double Frilled Mystic. Paradise Druid is Kavartek's only creature right now, and he's deciding what he wants to run out. Seeing their 3 mana up, he knows that there are shenanigans afoot.
Now, what makes this interesting is there is a way for Chris to work through this, and the way you work through a wall of counter spells is you play multiple spells in one turn. If I just play one spell, you counter that one spell, my turn is over, then Brad, as the person with the counter spells, has done everything correctly, and his turn has gone beautifully.
Yeah.
However, with the Paradise Druid that came down earlier, this allows Kavartech to play 2 spells. So here's Edgewell Innkeeper. He places this on the stack, and he says, Brad, what do you want to do about this? And now Brad is going to sit here and he's going to think about it for a while because Edgewell Innkeeper can be a problematic card. Now, if this gets countered, all of a sudden, Rotting Regisaur will be the next play there for Kavartech, and that's going to be a huge issue for Nelson. I think Nelson knows that that's a problematic card, but what makes Kavartech's play here so good is that both of these cards are problematic cards, and Brad's going to counter this one, and it's not going to be good news for him in just a second.
Not at all, because we know there's a Rotting Regisaur ready and waiting to pounce. So Edgewell Innkeeper into the graveyard. We could possibly get it back with Order of Midnight, but here comes the big dino.
And this is really, really bad news here for Nelson. That card is such a fast clock. And what's also really difficult now is that for Kavartech, you don't have to play anything else.
No,
you can, if you want to. You can play Order of Midnight, Alter Fate, Murderous Rider, Swift In, whatever. But realistically, Kavartech has 9 power on the battlefield. Yeah. He can just say, attack you.
Yeah, just swing, because he knows that the Frilled Mystic is the 4-mana counter spell. It's a counter on a stick, basically, and he would prefer that stick not to be in the way. So, just don't give him anything to counter, and if he's forced to, let him just play it as a flash creature.
And I think that's probably what Brad's going to have to do here on the end step is just play a Frilled Mystic. I don't think Kavartech has any reason to deploy another threat. Like casting Order of Midnight doesn't really change anything this game, so Nelson's going to do something that I'm sure he doesn't want to do, which is just play a 3/2 flash creature, untap, and pass the turn back.
Now, Murderous Rider could remove that from the equation if he wanted to, but he's holding on to it. What do you think he's eyeing out? Is it the Hydroid Crisis, Nissa?
I would say it's one of those more powerful cards that you mentioned, Hydroid Crisis and Nissa, but ultimately, there's no reason to cast Swift End or deploy Murderous Rider at this stage of things. The beautiful thing here for Kavartech is that he's so far ahead right now with that Rotting Regisaur that he doesn't really have to change anything that he's doing until Brad forces him to.
So we're just going to pass the turn back here for Brad, plays the land for turn. Rotting Regisaur is going to discard something else from Chris Kvartek's hand.
Yeah, this will be interesting. I think Swamp is a pretty basic discard here, but I do think it's very smart of Chris to think about what his draw steps could be and what he cares about. So he will just discard the Swamp, and now there is another additional copy of Rotting Regisaur.
Dueling Regis, why not? But Regisaur number 1 just going to swing in there, applying pressure to Brad Nelson's life total, and he's going to have to deal with this dinosaur one way or another. If it has to be Double Frilled Mystic blocking the big dumb dino, then maybe that's going to be what we see next turn.
I like Brad's play here. You take this hit, you go down to 4. You don't really have to worry about being burned out by Kavartech. Now here's an Order of Midnight. This is another example of playing a test spell and then playing another spell afterward, because now if you're Chris, you can deploy the additional copy of Rotting Regisaur. Again, 2 spells in 1 turn.
Nice.
You see Nelson shaking his head, realizing there's not really a lot I can do about this. That series of plays is so difficult, and Rotting Regisaur, sometimes in Magic you see a card like if you have to discard, and if you can't, you have to sacrifice the creature. Regisaur, that's not the case at all. You have to discard every upkeep, but you still get to keep the big bad dinosaur.
Yes, so on his upkeep, he can put a stop and fire off a Murderous Rider to kill the Hydroid Crisis, for example. Pads the life total a little bit for Brad Nelson, draws him a couple cards, but is it going to be enough here to get the job done?
No, this should probably spell disaster here for Nelson. He's going to concede the game right away. So Rotting Regisaur is very, very difficult for Nelson to beat, and more importantly, it's those 2 spells in 1 turn there from Chris Kvartek where he plays Edgewell Innkeeper. Nelson elects to counter that, gets punished in the worst way possible by the 7/6 dinosaur.
So Kavartech played around the counter spells very, very well indeed. So now what is Brad Nelson's game plan going into game number 2?
Well, Brad is going to get away from these counter spells because, as you just saw in that particular game, and it is worth noting that Brad was on the play in that game, which is best case scenario, the counter spells aren't end-all, be-all. And when we got to turn 3, Brad had counter spells for 3, 4, and 5 and lost that game very, very easily. So he needs to play more on his main phase and interact with Chris in that way. So he's going to get in all those copies of Lugstruck Beast, get away from some of the counter spells that he has in his deck, and let's play more of a mid-rangey game, which, as I think everybody knows who knows Brad Nelson, he is one of the best in the world at. Mid-range green decks is his MO, and he has the ability to sideboard into one of those with some interaction. This should get better for him. I don't know if it becomes favorable for him, but game 1, even on the play, as you saw there, Alias, horrible.
Yeah, that did not go his way at all, unfortunately. You know, Counterspell versus Dinosaur, it looks like Dinosaur won that round. So.
It certainly did.
He certainly did. Good old Reggie. Looks like the players are locked and loaded. Let's jump into game number 2 here in this do-or-die battle between Chris Kvartek and Brad Nelson. Both are fighting for their championship lives. Who is going to carry on in this tournament and who is going to go home not empty-handed, but, you know, they're not going to walk away with that top prize.
Well, this hand is better here for Brad. He had to send the first one back. I think he's almost certainly going to keep this. He's got a Breeding Pool and Island as lands, a couple copies of Growth Spiral. I wouldn't be surprised to see Frilled Mystic or Growth Spiral go to the bottom. Looks like he'll go with the Spiral, start with the Breeding Pool tapped, and that's how our game will begin.
All right, let's hope we find some more lands. If we were Brad Nelson, on the other side, though, we've got Edgewall Innkeeper, Shifting Ceratops, which is pretty good against the blue-based decks, and a Great Henge. Ooh, ×2. I like this card so much.
An interesting hand here for Kavartech. Great Henge in multiples is not ideal, as you see in Aether Gust, the draw there from Nelson. Shifting Ceratops is good in this matchup, but it's not the end-all, be-all because of Nissa and some other green cards that can appear. So this is a good hand here. It's nowhere near as good as the last hand that Kavartech did have, and now you're going to see Gust after the draw, still in the draw step, putting Edgewall Innkeeper back, and we'll see where Kavartech does want to actually place this card.
Right now, it's not super important or impactful to keep because he hasn't got any adventure creatures, so he's not getting the benefit of drawing. So it goes to the bottom of the library. He's going to run out his land for turn and pass it back.
I mean, you take a look at Kavartek's hand right now as Nelson draws a third land right on time, thankfully. It's very, very, very clunky. Additional lands aren't great, and so the only card, and Brad doesn't know this, of course, that he needs to concern himself with is the Shifting Ceratops, which his deck is capable of beating, and if he peels a land right now, he could deploy Nissa. Now, he can't. He picked up a copy of Paradise Druid, but still has Quench at the ready. So Brad's actually doing pretty well this game.
Yeah. Oh, there's a Rotting Regisaur. It will meet a Quench, though. Shifting Ceratops may be the play.
Yeah, I like going to Shifting Ceratops this turn. That's going to make you use all of your mana.
Yeah.
Can't be countered, obviously, but they'll just get a threat on the battlefield. And the next turn, you can go Rotting Regisaur plus the Great Henge, and that's actually a real turn.
Oh.
Now Nelson gets the opportunity to deploy Nissa.
Double Quench, though.
And he does have a key card right now in his hand, on the battlefield in Breeding Pool, which is going to work beautifully with Quench.
Oh, yes. So something will get countered. Whichever Brad Nelson decides to counter, we'll see very, very shortly.
Well, worth noting, Quench, pay additional 2. Rotting Regisaur is going to only cost 3. So being able to cast this here for Kavartech, he's going to be clear for takeoff. It's if he decides to play a Great Henge here, that'll be kind of the problem. So starting here with Regisaur is the smart thing to do if you are Chris.
If this resolves, though, that Great Henge can be played for 2. But
and then you can counter that, yes.
Well, I mean, worth a shot. Risk it for the biscuit. Maybe the deck playing the counterspells doesn't have counterspells.
He certainly does de-emphasize that aspect of his deck in the sideboarded games, as he should. But even though we are in sideboarded games and Brad has changed his deck, Regisaur and Ceratops, this dinosaur combo, for lack of a better term, these are problematic cards here for Nelson. Anytime a flash deck is kind of being played, they don't want to see gigantic creatures in the battlefield. Fortunately, only one of them can kind of get trample or have kind of pro-blue going on here in Ceratops, but this is still kind of worrisome for him as he's going to come across for 5 and knock Nissa down to 1.
Try my patience.
So Shifting Ceratops can certainly take care of Nissa, who shakes the world. There's no real way for him to stop it from doing so.
I like Kavartek's play a lot there that turn, by the way, not playing the copy of the Great Henge.
Yeah, very disciplined.
He can afford to play around Quench, so he's just going to simply do that. It was really, really straightforward stuff, but a very straightforward play doesn't mean it isn't a good one.
Fabled Passage will be the land for turn for Brad. He's just deciding which color he wants to go and fetch from the library. What is his way out of this?
I mean, it starts with Nissa, and it also probably ends with Hydroid Crisis working itself into the equation. Right now, Brad doesn't have one of those. And again, he de-emphasized some of the counter magic in this game after sideboarding, but still you can see just how poorly Counter Magic can line up in this particular matchup that he's playing.
Yeah.
It's not that hard for Kvartech to slide through some threats, and then when you toss in a counter roll one like Shifting Ceratops, things get even more difficult.
Yeah. So the 2 lands can deal with the Rotting Regisaur. Paradise Druid can chump block the Shifting Ceratops if needs be. There's a Vivien Arcbow Ranger off the top of the library, though. That's quite nice indeed. Great Henge is going to be the first thing down onto the battlefield. Double Quench can deal with it.
Double Quench can do it. Frilled Mystic can
2.
do it as well. The problem here with Frilled Mystic is that it costs 4.
Yeah.
And because it costs 4, well, I guess you can do it through Paradise Druid, so I'm going to take all of that back very quickly.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to use the actual Nissa lands to be able to do this. So Brad's going to sacrifice the Fabled Passage, get a basic island, and he'll Frilled Mystic, and let's make sure he auto-taps correctly. There you go. Now I think he's going to want to do this with Paradise Druid and not a land.
Looks like he wants to keep Paradise Druid up to block the Shifting Ceratops.
Okay, I guess he's got the mana available for Quench too. I can't forget, and this little mistake on my end, that the Forest and the Breeding Pool are actually going to tap for additional mana because of the Nissa. So this is actually pretty nice here insofar as he's got a green mana floating and has access to Quench off of the Paradise Druid. So if Kavartech wants to try to resolve another spell pre-combat, Brad can kind of battle here a little bit. So here's a great Henge with 2 mana available. Quenches, plural, can be played, but Brad's got to decide if this is worth putting the shields down to counter. Because don't forget, too, if you double Quench this, you do have to tap some of your lands to do that.
Yeah, open
But then
yourself up for a lot of damage.
Rotting Regisaur will make Chris discard Vivien in his upkeep, so that's less of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chris has already decided, all right, I'm going to lose this Vivien, but I don't need it right now to win. The Shifting Ceratops is doing a pretty good job of, sneaking through the defenses here. Rotting Regisaur just keeps applying pressure. And I think Great Henge getting countered, this has to happen because if he finds any other creature off the top, then that just refills the hand. They keep replacing themselves.
Yeah, so there's a second Quench. That takes care of that, and so Vivien is more or less taken care of now because of the Regisaur, assuming the Regisaur doesn't die this turn, which it looks like it's not going to. One thing that should die this turn is Nissa. It looks like both creatures are going to go that way. Worth noting that we could see a double chump block here. We see Frilled Mystic on one, Paradise Druid on the other. No mana available for the Shifting Ceratops, so it looks like Nissa's going to live.
Yep.
All right, Brad Nelson, draw Hydroid Crisis.
Nope, that's a forest. Well, Brad Nelson has to find something here, or he is going to be... Yeah, he's going to be in a bit of trouble here.
I mean,
Chris Kvartek's already up 1-0.
We are in a unique racing situation here, insofar as Brad now has... This is a third 3-power creature.
He's got 9 damage.
So he can attack for 9, put Kavartech down to 11. Kavartek's creatures tap to attack.
Yeah.
And so we are very much in a racing situation right now where Nelson needs Kavartech to kind of miss here. He's going to discard Vivien, and he needs him to draw a blank very, very badly.
Yeah.
Brad's going to play that land and pass the turn back, and Brad has some very live draw steps here, so big draw here for Chris.
Noxious Grasp off the top. Well, that's going to take care of Nissa.
Yeah, so Nissa's no longer a problem, and that also means that these creatures that Kavartech has on the battlefield can actually attack Nelson and not worry about the Planeswalker anymore.
Wow. Talk about an ideal draw off the top of the library.
One of the better draw steps there for Kavartech. He had some higher ceiling draws, but that one's not bad. Better than drawing a land, to be sure. And Chris has to figure out exactly how he wants to go about using this card.
Can't get through these lands to get to Nissa right now, so you know what? Noxious Grasp will get the job done. Rotting Regisaur will go towards it. Double block here, triple block indeed.
This is really, really smart here from Kavartech. But what he is doing here is he is saying, I don't have an answer, a way to kill your Nissa, so I have to make this attack. And Nelson's going, well, I want to protect my Nissa because it's my way to win the game. So going to trade a bunch of resources here, and then post-combat, still blast the Nissa with the Noxious Grasp. Now it's Shifting Ceratops versus a land. That said, Nelson still has some good draws in this situation.
What does he find off the top of his library? That's another Nissa who shakes the world, but he can't cast it. He needs another land. So this island needs to survive for him. That's a duress off the top in response. Oh, he didn't fire it off. Oh, why? Oh, no.
Wow,
why?
That's a little surprising.
Okay,
to clear the way for Rotting Regisaur. Okay, so using Duress is more of a way to clear the path for something. I was a little surprised. Now, obviously, it's easy for us right here to say,
of course,
well, he's got a spell, cast your Duress, of course. But Kavartech didn't know that. It would have been very easy for Nelson to have just drawn a land that turn or something inconsequential. He is playing a flash deck, of course, so you do want to maybe take a Sinister Sabotage in a spot like that. Now Kavartech knows about the Brazen Borrower that is in hand here for Nelson. And he's drawn another Nissa.
All right, we need another land now, please, library. You're doing a very good job of giving us our big threats, but we need to be able to past them. So, can Brad Nelson find a land? Rotting Regisaur is going to join the fray. Overgrown Tomb was the draw for Kavartech, but does this Nissa get onto the battlefield?
Now, you may have been wondering at home, why didn't Kavartech just deploy the Rotting Regisaur last turn? And the reason for that is because of the Brazen Borrower, and more importantly, the Petty Theft. You deploy that with an empty hand, he just bounces back to your hand with the discard trigger in the stack. You lose your card entirely. So Kavartech, realizing that, just passed the turn back. Now he'll discard his Overgrown Tomb, draws a Swamp, not ideal, but he is clear for takeoff here with the 7/6.
Here comes Rotting Regisaur swinging in 7 points of damage to Brad Nelson. He has a Nightpack Ambusher in hand. He can deploy that and start gumming up the battlefield with these pesky little 2/2 puppers. And of course get the buff from the Nightpack Ambusher, so...
Yeah, Nightpack Ambusher is actually a really good card, really good draw here actually, Alias, because while Brad is kind of stuck with the Brazen Borrower that's not doing a ton of the Nissa that he can't cast, this comes down, Brad will draw a card, picked up a copy of Lovestruck Beast, which he also might have interest in deploying, but Brad might also have interest in just saying, go, make a wolf, pass the turn back. So he's got some options this turn. It would also make a lot of sense if he does want to do some attacking potentially with the Nightpack Ambusher, but for now, he's going to make a 3/3, pass the turn back. So Rotting Regisaur is looking worse and worse as this game continues. Chris does have some good draws in this spot, but this game is starting to slip a little.
Yeah, that's another Regisaur off the top, so we'll have 2 discard triggers, but with an empty hand, it doesn't matter. But yeah, this is looking a little bit sketchy now for Chris Kvartek. Rotting Regisaur is going to get in for some points of damage if there are no blocks tendered. But, you know, this Nightpack Ambusher, if he doesn't play anything on his turn, he's just going to keep replacing that blocker. He gets a 3/3 every single turn he doesn't play something.
Yeah, the nice thing here for Brad is that options are starting to become plentiful for him, how he could play the game. Before he had no cards, so it was kind of like, I don't really have any options. I just have to kind of survive. Now I can afford to take a hit of 7.
Yeah.
So now here comes a Rotting Regisaur. Do keep in mind that Brad has the option here to cast Brazen Borrower / Petty Theft, more importantly Petty Theft, to bounce a Rotting Regisaur here on, at some point, I will say.
There's the land finally, but it is tapped. It's Temple of Mystery, finds a breeding pool on the top of the library. Does he keep that?
There may be some interest in Breeding Pool here. Breeding Pool obviously works very, very well with Nissa for a multitude of reasons, but most importantly is that it's a forest. I think he might have interest in additional land here. A random draw step, you could argue, is better than just an additional land. And he's giving this some real pause before putting this on the bottom with the Scry, because how much mana do I realistically need in this spot? So he's going to put that to the bottom. Again, remember, Petty Theft is able to bounce a Rotting Regisaur with the discard trigger on the stack.
Yeah.
So one of these Regisaurs is going to go bye-bye in just a moment, and Brad's not going to play a spell. So, discard trigger's on. Here's your Petty Theft. Goodbye, Regisaur.
So Reggie number 2 back to hand and discarded to his friend.
Another huge draw step here for Kavartech.
What does he find? It's a Lovestruck Beast. Okay, so some bodies to match the ones that are being generated off the Nightpack Ambusher.
Again, worth mentioning, lack of trample.
Yeah.
So when you have Nightpack Ambusher cranking out wolves, you're able to just block this however you want. Now Nelson with an interesting turn here if he wants a double block or just single block. Looks like he's going to go with the double block and maybe force Kavartech to have a murderous rider / swift end to blow this up. But if he had that, he'd probably just kill Nightpack Ambusher. So not the end of the world.
Yeah.
Lovestruck Beast the draw. Make a token. Make a 5/5. We're going back and forth.
Oh yeah, very much so. Back and forth between these two great players, and that's another Nightpack Ambusher, so now we could see double puppy generation.
Now that's a really, really good draw here. Now Nelson's got to reevaluate. Nissa is option number 1.
Yeah.
Does he want to tap out for that, make a 3/3, and then he can't really deploy anything past that? Looks like the answer is going to be no. Doesn't want to play Lovestruck Beast, can play Ambusher or Brazen Borrower whenever he would like. Advantage Nelson here, and I think a pretty meaningful way right now.
Oh yes, Swamp especially off the top of the library for Kavartech. No attacks. Nightpack Ambusher number 2 joins the fray, buffing the entire pack by 1/1. There's a Frilled Mystic off the top, so whatever Kavartech does draw now is going to get countered. This could open up the door for Brad Nelson.
And now Nelson gets to do something where he gets to kind of play the flash game of his deck. Now, Noxious Grasp is a draw here, but Frilled Mystic was a great counter.
Oh, yes.
Nelson's going to play that right away, and now this game has almost certainly slipped away here from Kavartech. A game where Nelson was at one point empty-handed, lost his Nissa.
Whoa.
He comes all the way back. He wins it.
Insane.
We're going to play a third one.
Congratulations to Brad Nelson there. So we are tied up 1 apiece between Chris Kvartek and Brad Nelson. They are fighting for their lives in the lower bracket. We're going to get a game 3 between these two excellent players. I can't wait.
And that kind of shows you exactly how Brad kind of has to play this game in the sideboarding games. He needs to get away from his counter magic a little bit, play more in the main phase. That's why you see the 4 copies of Lovestruck Beast in the deck now. He can still have some flash elements and some instant speed elements in his deck, which is why he still has counter magic in his deck. But he wants to play more of a Nissa type game. Nightpack Ambusher, a very, very important card for him in this matchup, so he's got to find one of those in this third game, I think, to have a chance at victory.
Nightpack Ambusher was just absolutely, like, it was awesome there. Having both of them on the battlefield and just generating double the dogs and then countering that Noxious, oh man.
Well, as great as Rotting Regisaur is in this matchup, it was a game winner for Kavartech in game 1 and almost won him in game number 2. Nightpack Ambusher actually is kind of the trump to that card because Nelson can just continuously pass the turn, create one of those little doggos, as you mentioned, and then that just blocks the 7/6 kind of in perpetuity until Vivian shows up. So that's actually really, really good news there for Nelson. That's a trump card in this matchup, and you saw it on display in that second game.
Well, here we go between Chris Kvartek and Brad Nelson. It's Golgari Adventure versus Simic Flash. Let's take a look at the opening hands here. That's a Growth Spiral and a Paradise Druid in hand for Brad Nelson. He will keep both players happy with their starting 7. Let's get things underway.
This is a really good hand here for Nelson. Kavartek's hand is just okay, in my opinion. He does have Rotting Regisaur, which is a pretty good card in the matchup, as we all know at this point, as we're working ourselves into the early stages of game 3. Noxious Grasp and Murderous Riders, plural, as interactions. So both players definitely have keepable hands. I think Nelson's hand is the better of the two off the jump, but draw steps will let us know exactly how this is going to go.
Importantly, Brad's found some of his ramps so he can get to his 4 and 5 mana threats a lot quicker. Lovestruck Beast off the top there for Chris Kvartek. Rotting Regisaur enters the fray. No counter magic for him. So he's going to get to attack in as soon as is possible.
These lands doing Nelson some damage is a little bit worrisome. He's not going to attack. He's going to leave his mana up for Growth Spiral and Frilled Mystic at this stage of things. Temple of Malady, the draw here for Kavartech is not so bad. I think Nelson's going to take this first hit and fall down to 9. Doesn't want to take many more of these, though. 7 is that's a lot.
Yeah, 7's quite a decent chunk of your life total there. Temple of Malady in the battlefield now for Chris Kvartek. Scries 1 to the top is another Murderous Rider, so he certainly has answers to kill things, but they also deal some damage to your face.
This is starting to look like a pretty good game and turn here for Nelson. He's going to play a Growth Spiral on the end step. This allows him to put one of these lands on the battlefield. Looks like he's leaning towards Temple of Mystery, so the Temple will come down. A little scry action here. Unsurprisingly, that's going to go to the bottom, so Mystery draw coming. But Nelson is starting to line things up in a way that makes a lot of sense. I don't think we're going to see him deploy Nissa just yet.
Any reason not to?
I mean, it leaves you a little bit open, especially when your opponent did nothing that turn. It's almost certain that they have something to do. And we see the 2 Murderous Riders and Noxious Grasp. Now it might be time to block, unless he dares fall to 2, because he's playing against a deck that does not have any additional reach to deal damage.
No
so
cats in this deck.
2's not 0.
Yep.
But you know, no more of those 7-pointers allowed now.
Oh goodness gracious me! All right, so Frilled Mystic is going to be run out here again like it was in the previous game, just as a flashy creature. We've got 2 Murderous Riders and a Noxious Grasp for Kavartech, so he can answer any threat that is played on Brad Nelson's turn. If he wants to, I mean, this Frilled Mystic, yeah, sure, it's fine, but is it worth killing?
It's tough to say. I mean, right now Chris looks like 4 mana, so he can't play multiple spells in one turn. He can't go Swift End plus Noxious Grasp in the same turn right now. So does he want to kill one of these cards? Let's say, for example, he wants to go with Swift End, right? If he gets quenched, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Right now, he doesn't. We know that Brad doesn't have a quench, and so here comes the Noxious Grasp. Now, what this allows is this gives Brad the window to fire up a Nissa, and drawing a land here is absolutely beautiful because this will allow him to most likely, assuming my math is correct here, play Nissa and also have Frilled Mystic at the ready. Naturally, he can't take another hit, but Alias, one last thing is that by Kavartech playing that Noxious Grasp, he's going to have to, that's less cards in hand, a more difficult decision with the discard for Reggie. So this game, his resources here for Kavartech, they're starting to be a little bit constricted on what he can do.
So we're going to go and find a forest off of the Fabled Passage and get to tapping. Here comes Nissa, who shakes the world. She is no stranger to this tournament setting, and she has certainly won her fair share of games outright. Going to target the Breeding Pool, leave up all the mana, basically. Could cost a second Nissa if you wanted to.
So able to get in here with the Breeding Pool. Remember that the Breeding Pools are forest, so they tap for double mana. So if Brad would like to tap both Breeding Pools for blue, he'll also get green with each of them as well, and that allows him to play a Frilled Mystic. Paradise Druid having Hexproof means that he's a lock to be able to block this turn on the Rotting Regisaur. And so, my estimation, if Brad gets out of this turn alive, he's going to win this game because Hydroid Krasis will be following up the next turn, and that'll be way too much for Kavartech to come back from.
Rotting Regisaur going straight for face, ignoring the powerful green Planeswalker. Saying to Brad, you want to live, you're going to have to put something in the way there, bud.
Yeah, it looks like the block is almost... I would guess
Paradise Druid?
I would guess Paradise Druid.
Yeah.
Brad doesn't want to misclick here, so let's think it through a little bit. Past the blocker, so let's make sure that dinosaur doesn't come across the old finish line there, Brad.
No false starts, please, there, Reggie. Hold.
Yep. So Paradise Druid, a pretty straightforward, simple block here because he still has the ability to cast Frilled Mystic if Kavartech wants to play a spell post-combat. There might be some interest in playing Lovestruck Beast post-combat, in which case Kavartech kind of got pretty good. Now, you could certainly make the argument of, don't play Lovestruck Beast, hang tight with Murderous Rider, but it looks like he's going to go towards the 5/5 and get a very frilly Mystic.
Oh, yes. He does get the card draw. But other than that, he just gets countered by the Frilled Mystic, and that's another Forest off the top, so at least that's discard fodder for the Rotting Regisaur, and another Frilled Mystic off the top for Brad Nelson.
Good draw there for Brad
Very
with the
good.
Frilled Mystic. Bad draw there off the Edge One Keeper there for Kavartech with the Forest. So does still have that Murderous Rider / Swift end, so he's going to have to get maximum value out of that. But speaking about getting the maximum value.
Here comes the Jellyfish. What's this, a 6/6? 3 life, 3 cards, and the ability to bring to life the Breeding Pool, keeping up the Frilled Mystic. Oh, no, we need another...
We'll need a Nissa activation.
Yeah,
so a Nissa activation on a Breeding Pool here would make life good for that Frilled Mystic that's in hand. Keep in mind, Nelson hasn't played a land yet either, so it's not that hard for him to cast a Frilled Mystic, depending on how he wants to line up his mana. And he also gets the opportunity here to attack with those lands because they do have Vigilance. So Brad deciding what land he wants to play here. Life is pretty good here for Nelson. He got out of those early turns alive. Rotting Regisaur did hit for 14, which is a ton.
You know, he pulled his weight in this team. He's probably going to go and have a talk with the others in the locker room afterwards, being like, "Come on, guys."
Yeah, a little help would have been nice.
Yeah, where were you? Come on.
The help will say you discarded us. Is what the help would say.
Right. So the Forest gets discarded to the Rotting Regisaur. A Innkeeper is the draw off the top. Murderous Rider in hand for Kavartech, but a Frilled Mystic, importantly, in the hand of Brad Nelson. So he knows about this double spell shenanigans, so he's going to let that resolve. Whatever is in hand for Kavartech is what Brad Nelson is zoned in on.
Yeah, that last card that we see, and everyone sees at home, is that copy of Murderous Rider. Not sure if Nelson knows that that's the card in hand, but he's pretty smart. He might be able to figure that out. Looks like Kavartech's just going to cast the Murderous Rider. Looks like it's going to be Swift End, pardon me, on the Hydroid Krasis. This seems worth fighting over.
Yeah, I'll say. 2 hits with the Hydroid Krasis in the air.
And you see right now, Brad's doing the math right now of how can I actually close this game out and get it over with. So Frilled Mystic's going to take care of the Swift End, and Kavartech is going to concede the game. Brad is pumped up.
He stays alive in this tournament. Unfortunate for Kavartech. He is leaving us right now, but hopes are still alive for Brad Nelson and Simic Flash.
I'll tell you, for Chris Kvartek, it's been another fantastic tournament. Makes day number 3 of competition here, but it's a tough road to hoe in these tournaments. And you know, he took a loss earlier today, and then